I was wondering if, because people like writing fuzz targets like often ask like, oh, like how should I, deal with these different configurations? Like, should I, use the first byte? And one thing that comes up sometimes is, just in your fuzzing harness, basically like running every single possible configuration, like which is reasonable if there's like 3 different modes. Have you compared against that? Like, how do you think that approach compares to yours, where the fuzzer is explicitly sort of picking which mode to use? Like, how do you think that compares to just using all of them?
I have mentioned the way of fuzzing each single configuration of the program. In some cases, like some real-world programs, first of all, their option space is pretty large. It may not be feasible to do that. And actually, the reason we compare config fuzz2 with config fuzz1 is that we want to see how interactions of those command line options contribute to code coverage. So in config fuzz2, we allow at most 2 options in a configuration, while in config fuzz1, we only allow 1 option in the configuration. So you mentioned like in the harness, for example, for each configuration, we create a harness in for that configuration, right? May I ask, are you referring to a configuration which is like a set of options and their settings, or a single option with its setting?
Yeah, typically it's that, where it's like, I don't know, like suppose you have like some parse function and it accepts like a buffer as one argument, then like, the next argument is an option for like strict mode on or off, right? And so, an approach that I would get asked about using is, just in the harness, instead of like using like the first byte to decide which, whether to turn on strict mode or not, you would just, run the input, both in strict mode and not in strict mode, like sequentially. Like, and yeah, obviously the state space is like, the config space is much smaller than, the cases what you're dealing with.
Yeah. Actually, from our preliminary result, we are still unclear whether the interactions between those options is important, or do they actually contribute a lot to the fuzzing coverage result. But this is something we're going to figure out in the final journal paper to see if there is a necessity to consider the interactions between different command line options. I think it is feasible to fuzz each command line options with a fuzzing harness. But if we consider the interaction between them, the space will be pretty large and infeasible. And for some command line options, for example, if they take a number as input, it is also important to fuzz its setting space, where maybe some sampling approach may help. For example, for we fuzz the minimum value, maximum value as some samples in between. We create like a harness for each of them, but it is still up to our future experiment to see whether it is important to actually have the fuzzer's ability with its coverage feedback loop to fuzz the setting space. Does that contribute to the code coverage or not? So I think we can have an answer in the final journal paper.
Thank you.
AFL has like an experimental tool which is called AFL argv. So what it does is essentially it's constructing the call to the program itself as well. So you would essentially get the command line parameters become part of the seed. And so you would call the AFL argv tool and then make the program a parameter of the AFL argv tool. And so the fuzzer has this chain, fuzzes this chain, and then therefore constructs these. So this is more like an idea. Do you plan to use this as a baseline tool to compare to as well?
Actually, this FL-argv functionality is one of the early ideas we have tried. So what we found out is that while the FL-argv, it is actually trying to generate a string, and as the configurations of program options, command line options, are highly structured strings, it is very impossible for the FL-argv functionality to generate a valid configuration for the program to execute. And from our preliminary experiment, we found that actually FL was, most of the time, it is just stuck there trying to find a valid configuration, then fuzzing the configuration itself.